My parents hid my billionaire grandmother behind the coat rack at my sister's engagement party. When I sat with her, my uncle grabbed my arm and had me escorted out. He had no idea what was already pulling into the driveway. The sound of my uncle's hand closing around my arm cut straight through the string quartet. Firm, deliberate. The kind of grip that doesn't belong at a candlelit engagement party in a renovated manor house but arrives anyway, the way all true things eventually do. Uninvited, at the worst possible moment, in front of exactly the wrong people. My necklace caught on his sleeve as he turned me toward the exit. A thin gold chain my grandmother had given me for my 22nd birthday. The kind of gift that costs $50 and means everything. It snapped free and disappeared into the parquet flooring somewhere between my uncle's fury and the service corridor door he was steering me toward. Efficiently, like I was a logistical problem to be resolved before the photographer arrived. I pulled my arm free before he got me through the door. Turned around. My grandmother hadn't moved. She was still sitting in the narrow chair they had placed behind the coat rack near the cloakroom entrance, tucked into the gap between the wall and the hanging winter coats, so that she was, if you were standing anywhere near the main reception rooms, essentially invisible. The chair was the folding kind, the ones venues keep stacked in the back for overflow, the kind nobody chooses when better options exist. She was watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. The gentle woman, the one who smelled like lavender and old paperbacks, the one who sent me handwritten letters and remembered the names of my colleagues and asked follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned months earlier, was gone. What was underneath looked like something else entirely, something that had been waiting with enormous patience for exactly this moment. My name is Cecile Marchetti. I'm 26 years old. I work as a junior researcher at an architectural conservation institute, which means I spend most of my time in rooms where things are handled carefully, and the age of something is treated as a reason for more attention, not less. My family is not like that. Let me give you the full picture, because I've spent a long time being the only person in my family who seemed to understand that context is not the same as excuse. My mother, Vivienne, is 52. She was the kind of woman who understood, from an early age, that image was a form of currency, and she had spent her adult life investing in it with the discipline of someone who has confused the portfolio for the person. Everything in our family home was chosen to communicate. The furniture, the neighborhood, the school we attended, the charities whose galas she attended and whose names she dropped with the practiced casualness of someone who has rehearsed the dropping. Vivienne was not cruel in the way that leaves obvious marks. She was the kind of cruel that works through suggestion and calibrated coldness and the strategic withdrawal of approval at moments when you most need it. My father, Marco, is 55. He ran a mid-sized property development consultancy that had been, for the past several years, operating on the thinnest of margins while maintaining the widest possible appearance of success. He wore this the way certain men do, with loud opinions and a car that cost more than most people's annual salary, and the handshake of a man who believed deeply and without evidence that confidence and competence were the same thing. My sister Isabel is 29. She is the child my parents had shaped most deliberately. Polished, photogenic, effortlessly social in the specific way of someone who has never been seriously challenged. She was engaged to Dominic Ferrara, whose family owned a regional construction empire spanning most of the Northeast. The engagement party, held at the Ferrara family's restored 18th century manor outside the city, was budgeted at a figure my mother mentioned every 72 hours for 4 months. It was not, by any honest measure, a party. It was an audition, a demonstration of arrival performed for an audience of people my parents needed to impress. And then there was grandmother Rosa. Rosa Marchetti, my father's mother, lived alone in a compact apartment in a hillside town 4 hours south. She was 77 years old, slightly built, with the hands of someone who had done actual work across actual decades. She wore the same small rotation of good wool cardigans and sensible shoes, carried a battered canvas bag that my mother described as mortifying every time she encountered it, and moved through the world with the particular unhurried quality of someone who had already made her peace with most of it and found the remaining questions genuinely interesting. My family treated her the way you treat a complicated obligation, present when necessary, minimized when possible. I had understood this for years. I had chosen, for most of my adult life, not to examine it too directly, not because I couldn't see it, but because seeing it fully felt like a door I wasn't ready to open. I visited grandmother Rosa on my own, twice a year, took the 4-hour train south, and spent slow afternoons in her apartment that smelled like lavender and old paperbacks, and the specific piece of a space that does not need to perform anything. She asked about my work and genuinely listened to the answers. She remembered, unprompted, the small things I'd mentioned. She treated my quiet, unglamorous life, the Conservation Institute, the small apartment I rented with one other person, the salary that was sufficient and nothing more, as exactly what it should be, no more and no less. I loved her in the uncomplicated, non-performative way that's difficult to explain to people who have experienced only conditional versions of it. My family managed her the way you manage a recurring low-grade obligation, dutifully, minimally, and with the ongoing low-frequency resentment of people who want things they don't actually want. I should have seen the engagement party seating coming. I should have anticipated anticipated it the way you anticipate weather when the sky has been building for days. I didn't. The first sign was the table plan, a month before the party. I saw it on my mother's kitchen table during a Sunday visit, a printed floor plan of the Ferrara Manor's reception rooms, color-coded. Family seating, in pale cream, was clustered around the central reception salon. A ring of tables in pale green toward the side gallery was designated for close family associates, the cousins, the long-standing family friends, the people you invite because not inviting them would be noticed and discussed. Grandmother Rosa's name was not on the plan. I pointed this out as calmly as I could manage. My mother looked up from the correspondence she was sorting and said, with practiced vagueness, "She's being placed separately." Placed separately, I said. "Rosa has a tendency to create unnecessary atmosphere, Cecile. You know how she is." I did not know how she was, in the sense my mother meant it. What I knew was that Grandmother Rosa was thoughtful and warm, and occasionally said things that made my mother uncomfortable because they were accurate. "She's family," I said. "She's a complication. The Ferrara side will have investors there, business people. I cannot have her sitting in the family rows looking like someone Marco found at a market stall." I opened my mouth. My mother picked up her correspondence and moved to the other side of the kitchen. I told myself she was being hyperbolic, that she'd find something peripheral but not insulting, that placed separately was just her way of describing something that hadn't been finalized yet. I was 4 weeks from understanding how wrong that was. The second sign was a conversation I walked into 10 days before the party. I had come to my parents' house to return a jacket my mother had left at my apartment, let myself in, and was crossing the hallway when I heard my father's voice from the sitting room. Low, deliberate, the tone he used when he was managing something rather than discussing it. "Just put her in the cloakroom corridor. Rosa always looks like she came in through the tradesman's entrance. Once the Ferraras are committed, it won't matter." A pause. My mother's voice. "What if Cecile makes a scene?" My father, with the impatience of a man who has already solved the problem in his own accounting. "Then we handle Cecile the same way we always handle Cecile." I stood in the hallway for 30 seconds without moving. I was looking for the part of myself that was surprised. It wasn't there. What was there instead was a specific cold clarity. Not the hot clarity that makes you react immediately, but the kind that settles in and changes the temperature of everything. The kind that doesn't dissipate. The kind that becomes structural. I left the jacket on the hallway table and walked back out. I should have said something. I understand that now. What I chose instead, telling myself I'd manage it at the party, that I'd arrive early and intervene, that I could prevent the worst of it through careful positioning, was the same pattern I had been repeating for years. The pattern of believing that a quiet fix was more workable than a confrontation. The pattern of absorbing the damage of my family's behavior on behalf of the people it hurt, so that no one had to be uncomfortable. I am not in that pattern anymore. At the time, it still felt like pragmatism. Grandmother Rosa arrived at the Ferrara Manor at 6:40 p.m. on a Friday in November, having taken the morning train and spent the afternoon in a nearby cafe rather than arriving early and standing around, which was exactly what she would do. She hugged me at the entrance, the hug of someone who is genuinely glad to see you and doesn't need to demonstrate it to anyone. She smelled like lavender and old paperbacks. She held on a second longer than social convention requires. "You look like you've been managing something," she said, not unkindly. "I'm okay," I said. She nodded in the way she nodded when she knew the difference between that and the truth, and had decided not to press. We walked into the entrance hall together. The party was 40 minutes from its formal start, but the Ferrara side was already present in numbers, well-dressed, effortlessly confident, the particular quality of people for whom events like this are familiar territory rather than aspirational occasions. The floral arrangements were extraordinary. The lighting had been professionally designed. Somewhere in the side salon, a string quartet was warming up. My mother appeared in under 2 minutes. She had the expression she wears when a plan requires real-time adjustment, a very specific compression around the eyes, a smile operating only below the cheekbones. She arrived from the right, took my grandmother's arm with a warmth that was entirely architectural, and began guiding her before Rosa had fully oriented herself to the space. "Rosa, you made it wonderful. You'll be just through here." "Mama," my father's voice from somewhere behind us doing the work of endorsing the redirect. "Dad," I said it to his face directly. "Where is she going?" Neither of them answered me directly. What happened instead was that my grandmother was guided, efficiently, with the practiced smoothness of people who have coordinated this kind of thing before, around the edge of the entrance hall, past the main reception salon, past the family seating, past all of it, and into the narrow corridor beside the cloakroom where the winter coats of 100 guests hung in a thick, rustling row. A folding chair had been placed in the gap between the coat rack and the wall. A small table beside it held a glass of water. The corridor was warm in the way of enclosed spaces where many coats have been deposited, and it smelled like other people's perfume and the particular closeness of somewhere that has not been designed for sitting in. My grandmother stood in front of the chair and looked at it. Then she sat down, quietly, without any visible reaction. That was the part I couldn't bear. "Mama," I turned to my mother. My voice was shaking in the specific way it shakes not from fear, but from something that has been contained too long. "You cannot put her in the coat corridor." My mother leaned close. Her voice was very low and very flat. "Then go and sit with her, Cecile. You always did prefer the wrong rooms." She walked back toward the reception salon, so I sat with her. I found a stool near the cloakroom attendant's station and carried it over and sat beside my grandmother in the coat corridor of the Ferrara Manor while the engagement party for my sister began 40 feet away. I could hear the music. I could hear the particular collective sound of a room full of people who are glad to be somewhere. Through the narrow corridor doorway, I could see at an angle the edge of the main salon, my sister Isabel, radiant in a deep burgundy dress, moving through the room with Dominic beside her. My parents working the room, my father's handshake, my mother's performance of warmth, in the direction of Dominic's father, Enzo Ferrara, a man I had met once and remembered as someone who listened more than he spoke, which I had marked at the time as unusual. My brother-in-law-to-be's older brother, Matteo, glanced into the corridor once, looked at us, looked away with the expression of someone who has noted something unjust and cannot determine what the correct response is. "You shouldn't be here," my grandmother said, unhurried, even, the same voice she used for everything. "You don't need to do this for me, Cecile." "I know," I said. "You'll make your mother angry." "She's already angry," I said. "She's always been angry. I'm just the only one who keeps pretending otherwise." Grandmother Rosa was quiet for a moment. Her hands rested in her lap. She looked at the row of coats in front of us with the expression of someone who finds the whole situation mildly, philosophically interesting. "You know," she said, "I brought my bag." She said it the way you note a fact that will become relevant shortly. "I know," I said. "Good," she said. 12 minutes later, my Uncle Franco arrived. Franco is my father's younger brother. He has the specific energy of a man whose primary function in the family is enforcement, the one who is sent to manage situations that require a harder edge than my father's performed bonhomie can provide. He arrived in the corridor with his jacket buttoned and the expression of someone who has been briefed and is implementing. "Cecile." He said my name the way my mother. He has the specific energy of a man whose primary function in the family is enforcement, the one who is sent to manage situations that require a harder edge than my father's performed bonhomie can provide. He arrived in the corridor with his jacket buttoned and the expression of someone who has been briefed and is implementing. "Cecile." He said my name the way my mother says the names of problems. "The family needs you in the main room." "I'm fine here," I said. "This isn't a request." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm staying." He looked at my grandmother. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, but the close relative of it. The thing that lives in the same neighborhood as guilt and pretends not to know it. "Rosa," he used his persuasion voice, the one deployed when force hasn't worked yet. "You understand we have business considerations tonight. Once things are more settled." "Franco," my grandmother said pleasantly, "you were always the least subtle of Marco's brothers." His jaw tightened. He looked at me. "Come with me now," he said, "or I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "You're going to have me removed from my sister's engagement party," I said, "for sitting with our grandmother in a coat corridor. Don't make this into something it isn't. It's already something," I said. "I'm just the only one naming it." His hand closed on my arm. "I want to be precise about this. It wasn't violent. It was the particular grip of someone who has decided that the time for discussion has ended and is implementing the next phase. Firm, directional. The grip of a man who is used to being the largest person in a disagreement." The necklace caught on his sleeve as he turned me and pulled me toward the service corridor exit. It snapped. The gold chain, the one my grandmother had given me, disappeared between the parquet tiles. Behind us, my grandmother opened her canvas bag. She took out a phone, not a smartphone, not the kind you'd expect, but a satellite handset, matte and heavy, the kind of device that costs what a reasonable person earns in a month. It looked entirely incongruous against her wool cardigan. I think, even now, that was entirely the point. She pressed 2 buttons. She said 4 words. "We're ready. Come in." My uncle stopped moving. He still had my arm. He stopped anyway. From outside the manor's main entrance, through the walls, muffled but unmistakably real, came the sound of vehicles on gravel. Not one vehicle, several. I need to tell you about the bag, because the rest of this story will focus on what came next. And the bag is where it starts. It was a battered canvas carryall, dark green, with a worn leather handle. My grandmother had carried it for as long as I could remember, to family dinners, to Christmas, to every occasion where my mother had looked at it and audibly wished it didn't exist. "That market bag," she had called it, "that embarrassing old sack." What my mother had never done, what no one in my immediate family had ever done, was ask what was in it, because asking would have required a quality of attention they had never applied to my grandmother. 3 vehicles came through the Ferrara Manor gates, not SUVs, Alfa Romeo saloons, dark blue, understated in the specific way of things that don't need to announce themselves. They stopped in a precise arrangement at the front of the manor. 5 people got out, all of them dressed in the specific way of people who are very serious and have no interest in looking like they are. The lead person walked directly to my grandmother, who had come to the corridor entrance and inclined her head. "Signora Marchetti." Everyone is positioned. My uncle's hand fell from my arm. Dominic Ferrara's father, Enzo, had come to the entrance hall when the cars arrived, not in alarm, in the particular controlled attention of a man who tracks what enters and exits rooms. He stood at the edge of the hall now and looked at my grandmother. Something happened in his face. A recognition. The specific recognition of someone seeing, after a period of confusion, exactly where they are. "Rosa Marchetti," he said. Not a question. "Enzo," my grandmother said. "It's been some years." I watched him absorb this. The recalibration was visible, not dramatic, just the quiet internal adjustment of a significant man encountering someone he understood, suddenly, to be in a different category than he'd been told. Because here is what my family had known, what my father had known for his entire adult life and never told his wife, and what my mother had decided didn't matter, because the surface presentation contradicted it so thoroughly that she had chosen to believe the surface. Rosa Marchetti, née Conti, had co-founded in 1979 a textile supply company with her first husband, my biological grandfather, who had died when my father was 11, which she had subsequently built, across 4 decades of decisions my family had never bothered to ask about, into one of the largest fabric and materials supply networks in Southern Europe. She had sold the operational company in 2009, retaining a significant stake. She sat on the boards of 2 foundations. Her name appeared, if you knew where to look, on the endowment records of a hospital in the city where she lived, and on the founding documentation of a scholarship program at a university I had attended without ever connecting the name on the scholarship to the woman who sent me handwritten letters. She had stepped back from all public profile 11 years ago, quietly, without announcement. She had simply receded, and everyone had done what people do when an older woman goes quiet. They had assumed she was finished. My father had known the entire time. That was the thing that reached me before anything else. That specific understanding, arriving in the entrance hall of the Ferrara Manor at 7:14 p.m. on a Friday in November, that my father had known, and had allowed his wife to seat this woman in a coat corridor and call her bag embarrassing for 30 years. A man came from the second vehicle. Dark suit, leather folder under his arm, the brisk composure of someone for whom environments are simply venues for work. His name, I learned later, was Edoardo Vitale, senior partner at a Milanese corporate law firm, my grandmother's legal representative for 23 years. He stood at the center of the entrance hall and opened the folder without preamble. He read 4 items. The first, formal withdrawal of Rosa Marchetti's personal endorsement from any financial or reputational arrangement made in her name, specifically including representations made to the Ferrara Family Business Group that Rosa Marchetti had reviewed and supported the proposed Marchetti family property venture. The second, a legal notice to my father's consultancy regarding fraudulent representation of family asset backing to prospective development partners, filed with the relevant regulatory authority that morning. The third, a letter from Rosa Marchetti to Enzo Ferrara, delivered formally and in writing, clarifying that she had not been consulted in any capacity regarding the business representations made by her son, Marco Marchetti, during the engagement discussions, and that any claims to the contrary were false. Enzo Ferrara read the letter. His expression did not change. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket. The fourth item. Edoardo Vitale paused. Then he read it. The proposed Marchetti family property venture, the development project my father had been pitching to the Ferrara Business Group for 8 months, the one he had presented at 2 private dinners as being partially backed by Rosa Marchetti's retained assets, the one that had been, in my father's telling, the reason this engagement had been so strategically important to cultivate had been represented to the Ferrara Group as having my grandmother's personal financial support and prior approval. She had been told nothing about it. Her name had been used. Dominic Ferrara had been standing beside my sister Isabel, near the entrance to the main salon through most of this. He was a tall man, quiet in the way of people who are genuinely rather than performatively calm, and he had been watching his father's face with the attention of a son who knows how to read it. He watched his father put the letter in his pocket. He looked at my sister. Isabel looked back at him with the expression of someone running rapid internal calculations and not yet having an answer. "Did you know?" he said, quietly, not accusing, asking. "I knew there were business conversations," she said. "I didn't know. Did you know your grandmother's name was being used without her knowledge?" A silence. "I don't think it was—" She stopped. "I think my father—" Dominic nodded slowly, the nod of someone who has received sufficient information. My father tried to cross the entrance hall toward Enzo Ferrara. He covered half the distance with the energy of a man who believes his momentum can reframe any situation. Edoardo Vitale stepped into his path, not aggressively, simply occupying the space, and said, in a tone of absolute professional neutrality, "Mr. Marchetti, I'd recommend you wait." My father stopped. I don't think I had ever seen my father stopped by words before. Edoardo Vitale produced a small recorder from the leather folder, set it on the hall table, pressed play. My father's voice filled the entrance hall, his backroom voice, the one I had heard through the sitting room door 10 days earlier, the managing voice, the voice that doesn't perform warmth because no audience is expected. "Just put her in the cloakroom corridor. Rosa always looks like she came in through the tradesman's entrance. Once the Ferraras are committed, it won't matter." My mother's voice. "What if Cecile makes a scene?" My father, impatient. "Then we handle Cecile the same way we always handle Cecile." The recording continued. It covered the deliberate concealment of Rosa Marchetti's identity and standing from the Ferrara family, the coordination of her placement out of sight as part of a strategy to secure Enzo Ferrara's investment commitment before she could be consulted or could complicate matters, and the line I watched Enzo Ferrara receive with a stillness that was its own kind of verdict. My father's explicit statement that once Rosa's name is on the documentation, she can object all she likes. Edoardo Vitale stopped the recording. recording. The entrance hall was completely silent. Dominic looked at Isabel for a long moment. She was looking at the floor, the specific focus of someone who is not avoiding a decision but completing one. She looked up. "I'm sorry," she said to him, not as a prelude, as a complete sentence. "I know," he said. He said it gently, which in some ways was worse than if he hadn't. "I don't think this works, Isabel." She nodded. She took the engagement ring off with one careful motion, looked at it for a moment, the look of someone finishing a calculation they've been running below the surface for some time. She placed it in his hand, not at his feet, not thrown, placed, with the particular restraint of someone who has decided how they are going to behave in the worst moment and is executing the decision. "I know," she said. She walked toward the side exit. She did not look at our parents. My mother sat down on the entrance hall bench. Not fainted, not fallen. Sat. The deliberate, deflated sitting of someone whose structure has given way and who has not yet decided what comes next. Cecile, her voice had a quality I had genuinely never heard in it. Not the warmth she performed, not the cold precision, not the sad register she deployed for sympathetic audiences. Something under all of those. Something that had perhaps always been under all of those. "Cecile, please, talk to your grandmother. Tell her we can resolve this. We're a family. We are still a family." I stood in front of her. My neck was bare where the necklace had been. My arm was tender where my uncle's hand had closed around it. I looked at my mother on the hall bench in the dress she had bought for this occasion, in the light of an evening that was supposed to represent the successful completion of years of careful positioning. I looked at my grandmother, who was standing in the corridor entrance, upright, her canvas bag on her arm, watching me with her quiet blue eyes and the expression of someone who has seen this coming for a long time and is not going to tell me what to do. "There's nothing for me to say, Mama," I said. She started to reach for my hand. "There's nothing," I said again. "And I'm not going to help you with this. The regulatory referral regarding misrepresentation of Rosa Marchetti's financial backing is being reviewed," he said. "The paper trail is substantive. Business emails, meeting notes, a term sheet that references her assets by name without authorization. Whether formal charges follow depends on factors outside our control, but the investigation itself has material consequences regardless of outcome." "My father's consultancy?" I said. "Several of the Ferrara Group's partners have already declined to proceed with conversations. Two of the development lenders who were approached based on the Rosa Marchetti representation are reviewing their exposure." He paused. "One has retained counsel. My father's property development consultancy did not survive the following year in its original form. Two partnerships dissolved. A third project collapsed when its financing was withdrawn, pending clarification of asset representations. By the following winter, the firm existed on paper, and not much more. The engagement was over. Dominic and my sister did not reconcile. There was no dramatic falling out, just the quiet, conclusive absence of someone who has made a decision and lives by it. Isabel, as of this writing, is at my parents' house, working out what the next thing is. I think she is doing this more honestly than she has done most things, which I hold at a small distance and try to find something like hope in. The Ferrara family made no public statement. Enzo Ferrara sent my grandmother a handwritten note that she showed me when I visited in January. It said in part that he regretted the circumstances and that he hoped the situation had not caused her significant difficulty. I think she is doing this more honestly than she has done most things, which I hold at a small distance and try to find something like hope in. The Ferrara family made no public statement. Enzo Ferrara sent my grandmother a handwritten note that she showed me when I visited in January. It said in part that he regretted the circumstances and that he hoped the situation had not caused her significant difficulty. She had written back a response I did not read because she had written it privately, but she told me it had been cordial and final in equal measure. My uncle Franco has not contacted me. My mother has called me 9 times since the party. I have answered 3 times. She has not apologized. She has, across 3 calls, explained the ways in which she has been failed, by circumstances, by my father's judgment, by my choice not to intervene on her behalf, and in a register that surprised me even now, by my grandmother. She called Rosa Marchetti calculating. She said it with the conviction of someone who has worked out a logic and is committed to it, regardless of whether it maps to reality. I stopped answering after the 3rd call. My grandmother and I had lunch last month, the 2 of us in her apartment, the one my mother had called embarrassing, the one that looks exactly like what it is, a place where someone has lived a long time and cared more about books and light than about how the space would appear to visitors. She made pasta, from scratch, the way she'd taught me when I was 9, the way that takes longer than any reasonable person thinks is necessary, and tastes like the difference between something made and something assembled. We ate at her kitchen table with the windows open even though it was cold, because she likes cold air in rooms where things are cooking. I told her I'd found the necklace. One of the people from the vehicles had noticed it on the parquet and picked it up and given it to Edoardo Vitale, who had given it to me at the Milan meeting, wrapped in a piece of tissue. The clasp had broken clean, but the chain was intact. I had taken it to a jeweler near my office who had repaired it for €8. My grandmother nodded. "The bag?" she said. "Still embarrassing," I said. She smiled. "The real one. The one that appears slowly and means it." "Good," she said. We sat at the kitchen table for a long time after lunch, not needing to fill the silence. Outside, her hillside town was doing what it does in winter. Quiet, unhurried, indifferent to urgency in the way of places that have been there a long time. Inside, her books occupied every available surface, with the particular density of things that have been accumulated because they are loved and not because they perform anything. I thought about what she had said the night of the party. "We're ready, come in," 4 words, said quietly into a satellite phone, with the calm of someone who had been patient for a long time and had chosen their moment with precision. Fire, I thought. That's what it was. Not the destructive kind, the clarifying kind, the kind that shows you what the structure actually was beneath the surface that was being so carefully maintained. My family had built an entire strategy on a foundation they had decided to be ashamed of. They had hidden her, minimized her, managed her like a problem, and called her bag mortifying and placed her in a coat corridor and told themselves this was simply the necessary management of optics. When the foundation revealed what it actually was, the structure came down very fast. The pasta was good. I took the evening train home with the heater running and the compartment quiet, and my grandmother's voice in the back of my mind saying the thing it always says, which is that patience is not the same as passivity, and that the people who mistake one for the other tend to be very surprised when they find out. They called her a complication. She was the only person in that house who hadn't lied to anyone. I've stopped being surprised that those two things were true at the same time. I've stopped being surprised about a lot of things. The necklace is back around my neck. I intend to keep it there. Same formula, same structure, same word density. Swapped to Cecile Marchetti. Italian setting, Antwerp replaced with a Northern Italian manor. Grandmother Rosa instead of grandfather Theodore. Sister's engagement party instead of brother's wedding. Canvas bag instead of leather satchel. Textile supply empire instead of aerospace. Eduardo Vitale as the attorney. Enzo and Dominic Ferrara as the other family. And property development fraud instead of hotel loan. Misrepresentation.